sharing of experiences and sharing of thoughts. Eats today, so that's always good. And again, crop walk, very important. A few weeks ago, Jasmine did a talk about the crop walk. Did a very good job of explaining where the money goes and how important it is. So this is session 3. Really thank you for returning. Just a little. So we are focusing on some discussion around this overt, covert racism pyramid. Our focus has been on elements of covert racism, which many times lead to racial microaggressions. Covert racism is generally things that are socially acceptable and generally practiced, many times unintentional. So it's because they can be part of our culture, be unintentional, we can do them unintentionally. It's important for us to look at them and think about how what we want to do moving forward. Last time we discussed these 3 elements, and there are a couple of videos I want to show related to those that I didn't get a chance to show last time. So we talked about white silence. White silence can take place in many forms, but basically being quiet because we're afraid to stir the pot, rock the boat, or we don't want to lose friends, those kinds of things. So I'm going to show a little video that gives one example of how we might break that silence.
My sister-in-law, who's half black, half white, but looks white, blue eyes, whiter than most white folks, very white. She and I, we kind of grew up together. We raised our children together, so they're first cousins, and it's a wonderful, very, very multicultural family. So we're going in a Safeway one day, and Kathleen, my sister-in-law, is in front of me, and she's, writing a check for her groceries. Now, my daughter, who at the time was 10 years old, was standing with me, and I was directly behind her, getting ready to get my groceries. So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who is a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? Isn't it a nice day today? They're just chatting up, and says, yeah. So Kathleen writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries, because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just a little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10. Notices immediately a difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, and she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point, my daughter looks at me, and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming from her eye, like, Mommy, you're not going to let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women. All right, now I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry black woman, right? And they're going to be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama. So then I just give her the 2 pieces of ID. I said, some things you got to choose your battles, right? And then it gets worse. She pulls out the bad check book, right? So this is a book that shows the people who've written bad checks. So she starts searching for my license in the bad checks, at which point it's just out of control now. Just as I'm standing there, trying to decide what to do, and it's really deeply humiliating. Now my daughter is in full-blown emotionally upset, who's 10. My sister-in-law walks back over, and she steps in and she says, excuse me, why are you doing this? And the checker goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking her through all of these changes? Why are you doing that? She goes, well, this is our policy. She goes, no, it's not your policy because you didn't do that with me. Oh, well, I know you've been. She goes, no, she's been here for years. I've only lived here for 3 months. And so at this point, the 2 white elderly ladies go, I can't believe what this checker has done with this woman. It's totally unacceptable. At which point, the manager walks over. So the manager walks over and says, is there a problem here? And then my sister-in-law again responds. She goes, yes, there is a problem here. Here is what happened. So you see, she used her white privilege. And even though Kathleen is half black and half white, she recognizes what that means. And she made the statement. She pointed out the injustice. And she, as a result of that one act, influenced everyone in that space. But what would have happened? I can't know for certain had the black woman said, this is unfair. Why are you doing this to me? Would it have had the same impact? But Kathleen knew that she walked through the world differently than I did. And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
So I like that ending. Really hits on, here's what we can do every single day. And also I think we can, I have to admit, being a former retailer, that in the 70s and the 80s, I did some of those things where
I would like to become a pediatric.
I did some of those things myself as far as, racial profiling and treating one person different than the other person because of the color of their skin. So that hits home pretty hard. The other one we talked about racial profiling. We also talked at some point about racial profiling, kind of when we see a person, what goes through our minds, what we think, what we relate to them just because of how they look. I'm going to share a video with you. This is a spoken word piece by a gentleman by the name of Caleb Rainey, who is from Iowa City, lives in Iowa City. He's a spoken word poet. He does some education. He does a lot of performances, and I think Ro Faggy, who's not here today, said he and Susan went and saw a performance at the Englert Theater last week, and Caleb was performing. And he talks in here, he mentions about the 3/5 agreement, which I think was 1879, he'll say the date in here, of where to appease the South, because they didn't feel they were getting representation enough in the legislature, slaves were given 3/5 representation. Of course, it was no advantage to the slaves, it just helped the plantation owners. So he talks about how this has kind of morphed itself into some things that happen today.
Wow, look at this. 94% of people believe company culture is important to an organization.
The new 3/5. In 1787, the 3/5 Compromise was created by the inability to recognize the humanity within black people. The denial was legal. Now, 3/5 is a cultural compromise. 60% black is all that's authorized for America's acceptability. So if I don't fit into respectability politics, or I don't speak quite right, or my attitude doesn't appeal to you, or my presence doesn't apologize, or my consciousness criticizes your constructs, then I'm too black for you. And that just won't do. So for you, I've got to choose which 3 I'll be, and which 2 I'll hide from you. 1. They say dress to impress. But what they subtly stress is that I should conform, assimilate to the norm. So if I sag my pants too low, then I must not know how to respect myself. Because people with wealth wear a belt. But maybe, just maybe, the unforgiving leather reminds us too much of our ancestors. Or maybe we're wearing pants that don't fit because mama had to pay rent and we ain't too proud to wear hand-me-downs. Or maybe, just like anyone else, there's a sense of comfort that's felt when you endorse the course of those who truly do support you. 2. They say we should speak proper English, because what we speak is just gibberish. It's not possible that it's their understanding that's lacking. It must be our education that's lacking. So when I speak, I don't finish words or use proper terms or perfectly pronounce everything I spit out. So one day you may hear me say, bruh, I was tweaking. What was you on last weekend? Or on Sundays, you may hear my father pray, Lord, give me strength. Or on holidays, you may hear my granny say, give me some sugar. Sugar? For some reason, when we speak, there seems to be a belief that we must not know how the words are supposed to go. 3, they say we gotta be funny, or focused on the money, or singing and dancing, or running and catching, because that kind of black's not a threat. There's no chance we'd attack if we're too busy being master's pet, so it's expected that we fit into that template. Because a black man reading or a black woman leading hasn't been allowed in so long, we've been conditioned that it's wrong. 4, they say white is beautiful. Look at that nose, so excusable. Look at that hair, so elegant. This is an ideology we're expected to share. I'm supposed to look at my reflection and question why attractiveness has never been attached to us. But when we redefine melanin, we're able to redefine beauty. And that's when you'll see that our confidence has risen, and it'll blur your vision as you find yourself unsettled and your ideology's disheveled. 5, they say we're better off than we used to be. Like we should be satisfied with a few pleasantries. We used to not even make it to trial, but at least now we're in court for the denial. So it's preferred if we preach peace and the gradual effect, because if we pick up the peace and demand the system be checked, then we're seen as the source of this crooked course. See, I live my life in 3/5. Because I inherited this. So if I have one too many characteristics that white people can't sit with, then I'm that nigger. And we know niggers don't live long around here. So for you, I've got to choose which 3 I'll be, and which 2 I'll hide from you. I'm negotiating my humanity. My blackness must be compromised, so you'll finally recognize me. Because at least with 3/5, I know that I exist.
So, started out the first session throwing out 3 questions. What is racism? Does racism exist in our community, schools, country? And then why is it important to talk about racism? So, again, as I've said every session, I want you to continue to kind of keep these in the back of your head. We're going to come back to them in our last session after we've kind of run through everything. Oops, click too fast. Table guidelines, I think most of you have been here once already, but please encourage you to share openly and honestly, which can be hard, but I think we're starting to develop some rapport in this group and some trust in each other. I think we do have a church community that's really good at listening, not being judgmental. And I think we can really grow by sharing honestly what we've experienced, some of the mistakes that we've made. It's okay to have different ideas and thoughts. Listen for learning and understanding, and then try to let everybody have a chance to share. So, at your table, you have an element of racism, and I switched up one table. I apologize for that because we lost this table. So you have an element of racism. Read the element of covert racism. Read the description, kind of think about what your reaction is. So this would have to take place in sharing. What's your reaction? Can you think of media or historical examples? Have you had any personal experiences related to it? things that you've witnessed or things that you have done. And then why might this be an issue or problematic? So you don't have to necessarily talk about every single one of these, but try to think about that. So go ahead and go through this process at your table. I'm going to put up a slide. So one of the things that was pointed out last time is, can you put a time on it, so that a specific time, so we know when we're done and everything. So I will have a 20-minute timer up here, and so you can kind of keep an eye on that. Okay? Okay.
Brenda.
All right, great discussion going on. Thank you for great participation. Okay, which tables had I don't see color? Okay. All right, so someone to share from that table some highlights of what you talked about.
So we talked about how the idea that I don't see color is usually well-intentioned, and what people are trying to say or trying to mean is that they don't treat people differently. But the way it actually comes across is a failure to acknowledge that even if you personally are not treating people differently based on their race, we're living in a system that does. And the other thing we talked about is when we say we don't see color, we miss out on the opportunity to see and celebrate diversity. And to bring justice to the situation. Because treating people the same is not always justice. That's a personal thing.
Colorblindness overlooked. Living out the weaknesses.
You guys can have my, I don't see color.
There's only one human race, I don't.
Oh. Anything else? So, one of the things I should have said, just for those of you who didn't have this, white people often say this when the conversation about race becomes uncomfortable for them in an attempt to curtail honest, painful conversation and confrontation about the realities and the devastation brought on by racism. Yes, of course, God only created one human race. And as the biblical story, let's see if there's anything. To not see color is to not see the beauty of God's richly diverse human creation, and also ignores the real impact of racism that affects people of color every moment of their lives. So do you guys have some highlights from your conversation?
It seems like it's a learning experience. And from my viewpoint, that sure, you need a historical context. You need to really get into the history of why someone would say that. It's denying the origin of people that, it's denying people to say that. I mean, you're
Denying their uniqueness.
you're denying it. I mean,
There it is, yeah.
and so it's very harmful on that. I mean, I was sharing the fact that I spent 5 years in Texas, and I mean, we talked about we're having white privilege and things like that nature. I had a roommate, and I got to learn that there's, within the Hispanic world, they have their own, I don't want to say prejudice, but they have their own views. And so you'd have someone who may be a mestizo blood from Mexico versus somebody who's Castilian. And so they have their own uniqueness, where somebody from Argentina would say, we don't get along with Brazil because Brazil has more black people than Argentina. And so it's a universal thing that needs to be unlearned, I guess. So,
I know when I went back to school to get my teaching degree, one of the courses I took was this table had kind of a combination of, they had two things that are really related. Tone policing and then touting respectability, politics. The lady in the video with the check, she sort of addressed tone policing there in that if you're a person of color, black person, and you speak up or you stand up for yourself, people are afraid of you. You're being an angry black person, that kind of thing. So that's sort of what tone policing is. And then respectability politics is, the idea started as a philosophy among black elites during the Reconstruction who believed that they could best uplift the race and end racism by correcting quote-unquote bad traits of black people and working hard to prove to white people that black people are quote-unquote just like you or quote-unquote want to be like you. So what are some highlights of your conversation here?
Well, go ahead.
Brenda brought up right away, as far as tone policing goes, she wishes in general we would calm down. Like the news, like everything. Right. So that's a big one.
Certainly helps perpetuate things.
Right, but I think just expanding on some examples of not accepting anger, not accepting even maybe a louder, boisterous time, that we don't. Yeah, it's, disrespecting different cultures in different ways.
One of the things I should have mentioned at a previous session is we are trying to videotape this for people who aren't able to come in person. So when you're sharing, try to speak up as loudly as you can. I know that doesn't feel natural sometimes, but hopefully we may have a chance of picking it up. Jonathan, you were
I
going to
will
say.
use my outside voice.
Okay.
And I will, my first reaction to Caleb Rainey was tone policing.
Mhm.
That he's got this sort of cool, I'm hip attitude, and at least that's the tone that I'm hearing. And I go a lot by tone because I'm not seeing as much. And that was off-putting at first.
Mhm.
But I get into the content that he's talking about, he's right on.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think, but I think it's sort of like, how you go to theater and a certain way of play is presented in the tone. It's kind of the same thing. It's, yeah, this is a big deal, and that is kind of how it reacts. So that was, thanks for sharing that observation and those thoughts. John, you were going to say something?
Yeah, okay. On the respectability politics, like, one thing that, people, I said this at my table, but people here might have more knowledge of this because, they might have grown up around the time, but it's talking, how nowadays it's usually talked about, how, people should be it was brought up with MLK here, people should be like MLK, just do things how he did it, and then they'll be respected, and I personally see a lot of stuff that just shows okay, at the time, he definitely was not respected for what he was doing, and he was still making compromises and getting, heck, even pushback from, people who were saying, hey, I appreciate, hey, I like what you're doing, but you're going too far. You're kind of pushing the cause. Maybe you should back off a little bit and let things sort themselves out.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting how, there's this, you should only protest in this way or that way. So, many white people extremely upset National Football League, black players, or any players in general kneeling for the flag. Fast forward to the death of George Floyd, and the protesting that was going on. Well, that wasn't good either. They should just look for a more peaceful way to protest. Well, they tried that, and all that happened were they were criticized. So it's easy to kind of think about being in a black person's shoes to think, well, the peaceful stuff doesn't work.
And did we not see such wonderful examples of white protests on January the 6th that were the height of peaceability?
Yeah, and I usually see examples of, like, usually when people talk, like, when I see, like people of color complaining about peaceful protests, how things sometimes get treated differently, I hear, like, sports riots get brought up, where sometimes because of, after a big sports game, sometimes people just, go wild, and then they're not treated the same in the place.
Okay, so those two tables had my intention was not racist, which kind of speaks for itself. Whether we are explicit or not in saying I'm not racist or attempting to explain it, intent itself is racism. Unconscious, implicit bias and microaggressions born of institutional racism are so embedded in the white psyche that the intent is not necessary. So, Deanne and Donna, what are some highlights of your discussion?
So one thing I shared was my working environment. I work with a smallish group of nurses, and there's one person in particular who I am sure is full of microaggressions, but would say I'm not racist. And I've heard her make just little comments, but it's always been in a place where there are other either nursing staff or other families around. And so I struggle with how to respond to that in the moment. And this happens every once in a while, and to make it be a sort of a public thing, I'm not comfortable with, and I don't think that's appropriate at the time. But she's somebody that I'm probably a little bit more than like a work friend, but we don't do things outside of work. We just have known each other for a really long time. So I feel like at some point I would be comfortable having a conversation with her, but I'm having a hard time finding that opportunity.
Have her read that.
Just slip it in my box. So, while I have not heard the words "I'm not racist" come out of her mouth, I am quite sure she has said that before. I wouldn't be surprised if she hadn't, and she probably does not see herself as racist. But when I heard her say things like, "Well, he's just playing a race card," well,
Or is he sharing his experience as a person of that race?
exactly.
Why do you have to call it that?
Yeah, right. So that's something that I struggle with. I personally can't remember a time where I've ever said to somebody, I'm not racist, but, out in amongst friends or coworkers, so,
This table? Highlights?
Well, I think that comment, a lot like, I don't see color, if it's being said, which it most likely would be, is as a response, as a reaction to somebody pointing something out to you, what you're saying is, here's my eraser, and I just want to erase what you're talking about. And I believe very strongly, and I've come to feel that there is generational trauma, especially in the Black community. How dare any of us, how dare any of us deny somebody the chance to talk to their trauma?
Yeah, and I think.
Whatever that is, and it may seem like nothing to us from our point of view and our perspective, but just listen. And that be because of something I said or done or not said or done that caused a problem for somebody, or somebody sharing their experience, just be open to hear it and not judge it, whether they say it with X in their language or whatever their language is, let them say it. And whether it ramps up with a tone of, I feel a little angry about this, let them be angry, because guess what? Maybe they're angry. And maybe it's not on us to say, well, do they really deserve to be that angry about it?
Yeah, I've heard so many times, slavery was a long time ago, I didn't participate in it, and we should be over it. But
We should be, shouldn't we?
But I think, no, but I think,
I mean,
I think the reason we're not is because, I think you're exactly right, there is a generational trauma. And if you look at things like the video we watched last week about redlining and how that has had a long-term, and that was not back in the slavery, that was not that long ago, that was during Jim Crow. And the long-term effect that has had on income levels and, wealth building and that kind of thing. That's generational. Yes, Emma?
And I think the whole thing with my intention was not racist. It doesn't matter what your intention was, you don't get to decide what somebody else is offended by. Like, people have the right to feel however they feel about what you said, even if that wasn't what your intent was, So you don't get to tell other people what they are or are not offended by.
Yes, that's an excellent point. Which table? They took. Oh, you did? I apologize. What did you guys have?
We had the same, I'm not racist.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
But basically, we said, we used that. Also, I have black friends, and so, and maybe led with it rather than in reaction to it, like, wanting to get an explanation.
Have you ever wondered,
Sorry.
Help explain to me why I'm not racist, so explain to me why this is such and such. And getting a kind of a raised eyebrow with expression.
I'll say it.
Yeah.
When Stacy Walker was here and talking about, whatever it was he was talking about, it was at the time when, down south, they were taking down the statues and stuff. And I didn't quite understand that. So I asked him the question and led with, I'm not racist, and helped me to understand what they're feeling when they see these statues and want to take them down. So I'm one of those that did that out of ignorance and bohemia, so I don't know everything.
Well, and thank you for sharing that honestly. It's likely that I've said that. I know I used to think that, I'm not, I don't participate in it, I think that's what I wanted to believe, but you were talking about a lot you don't know. And that's what I've really discovered in this journey this last year and a half, is that I need to be educated, and I need to educate myself. It's not a person of minority's job to educate me. It's myself to become, my job to become educated. And that's one of the reasons we're so passionate about doing this series. And it just hit me again when we were planning for the services today and thinking about Indigenous peoples. I know like this much, and just in doing some research, it's like, wow, why didn't I know that? Why wasn't that taught in school? Why isn't that in our history books? Why do we keep this so quiet?
We were just saying that our history books don't know. That I remember when I was in college in the 70s, a speaker talked about and defined history as the fable agreed upon by the majority And so,
I've heard that, yeah.
yeah, and so, you know, even, it's such a huge issue, and you're right, education, and that's the one good thing about more modern, recent times, is it is available.
We have easy access.
Yeah,
If we look for it.
if we look for it, yeah.
Catherine?
Just quick comment, I've oftentimes said to somebody, I am racist because I didn't know. And so for the whole group, how many of you knew about the doctrine of discovery? How many people were talking about it?
I discussed it in the sermon today.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's a teaser.
Yeah, pay attention. No, I'm just saying that because of education, that's what's made me aware of that. But most of us were never taught. And if we don't know, just by the very fact that we don't know, in some ways we are racist because we don't know. So anyway,
So awesome discussion. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to close with a couple of videos related to two of these. So this one's related to color blindness. Oh, keep in mind here, this was on United Way's 21-Day Challenge. It's a video that was on MTV, so keep in mind the target audience are younger people than us.
Why people say, oh, I don't see color as a way to fix racism? Yeah, that doesn't work. On this show, we talk about race all the time, but I've got a bomb to drop. Biologically speaking, race doesn't exist. Oh my goodness, we've all been lied to! Wait, why am I hosting this show? So race isn't biological, but the social construct of race and racism still have a very real impact on everyone's lives. And this isn't just about feelings. Race is all about the structural foundation of social power. So why do so many people incorrectly think race is biological? Well, beyond the fact that we like to group people based on external characteristics, it goes like this. In biology, there is a concept of genetically different subspecies, which a lot of people confuse with human races. Biologists actually have a scale for this, and humans don't even come close to qualifying. Throughout history, people have used this incorrect understanding of subspecies to justify all kinds of terribleness, and even proclaim other races as less than human. But modern genetics has shown that the lines around race are so arbitrary that they're actually meaningless. And since I'm not a scientist, I'll take a quote. Francis Collins, the director of the National Human Genome Research Institute, said it himself: "Those who wish to draw precise racial boundaries around certain groups will not be able to use science as a legitimate justification." Oops, I dropped the mic. So if race doesn't exist biologically, why do we keep talking about it? Sound the alarm! We keep talking about race because we created it. Yay, us! That's right, race is a social construct. A social construct is a category, perception, or idea created and developed by society and then applied to individuals or groups. But social constructs are still very real and have huge impacts on our lives. Because you know what else is a social construct? Money. And if you don't think money has an enormous impact on your life, well then congratulations. You either have a trust fund or you're an adorable baby. Here's what I know. Talking about racism just creates more racism. No. First off, race isn't the problem. Racism is. And even if it was the problem, problems don't get worse when you talk about them, and they don't magically go away when you ignore them. Not true. I had 5 cavities, I ignored them, and all 5 of those teeth fell out. Poof. Problem solved. Colorblindness, while nice in theory, has no effect on structural and institutional racism. Racism is a system, and that system benefits certain people at the expense of others. Ignoring it just lets those problems persist. Don't believe me? Let's take a look at some examples where colorblindness doesn't work. Number 1, preschool punishment. Let's face a fact. Preschool-aged children of every race are monsters. But according to the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights report released in 2014, Black children make up 18% of preschoolers, but almost half of all suspensions. Half. And I don't think anybody believes all these preschool teachers are racist, out to get little Black children, but the data shows that Black and Latino children often face steeper punishments than their white classmates for the same behavior. That's a problem. And simply believing we shouldn't see race or we shouldn't talk about race does nothing to solve this problem. Number 2, the name study. A study by the National Bureau of Economic Research confirmed that people with ethnic-sounding names, that's a whole other episode, are less likely to get interviewed when they apply for jobs. Meanwhile, applicants with white-sounding names actually get 33% more callbacks for interviews. It's the equivalent of having 8 years of additional experience. Shout out to all the white Taquans struggling to get job interviews. And it's not just black and white. They've done similar studies around the world, and in Canada, people with white-sounding names were 35% more likely to get callbacks than people with Indian or Chinese-sounding names. So instead of just assuming people shouldn't care about color or names, companies, governments, and schools should take the bias out of hiring and experiment with nameless resumes to, solve the problem. Number 3, renting an apartment. When the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Urban Institute did a study about real estate, they found that Black, Latino, and Asian renters were shown up to 12% fewer units than white renters. And when the Fair Housing Justice Center used actors to apply for apartments, they found that Black and Latino renters were often told there were no apartments available, while white applicants were shown apartments in the same building. So this building has a pool, a laundry room, and a racist landlady. Colorblindness won't fix housing discrimination. We're going to need smart laws and a concerted effort for that. So tell me again how colorblindness is going to fix the fact that I can't get an education, a job, or a house. In many cases, colorblindness is actively harmful because it creates a false sense of security for the groups it directly benefits. The people who benefited from systemic racism can assume that they got the job or a house or weren't suspended from preschool simply because they were more qualified or just better. Ignoring race or only acknowledging that it doesn't exist biologically is not a solution to these systemic issues. It takes work, effort, laws, and new systems to undo racism. These differences may seem minute, but they're part of a very large structure of oppression that's been ingrained in us. If we can understand that we made it up, we can actively work to change it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Decoded.
I just think she does a fantastic job of explaining social construct. Racism is a social construct, and she talks about, okay, this doesn't get to the root cause. What's the root cause? Here are some solutions. I just think she does a great job. And then I think this one's a little shorter, but this one's.
Can I just interrupt for a
Yeah.
second? I have to go get dressed
Yeah.
for worship. But I'd like to invite everyone here, one, to join us for worship if you haven't already worshiped today. Also, we're going to begin our second service by gathering outside where the flags are. And there are some little inserts that go through the service. So I just want to bring that to everyone's attention. And so I'm sorry for the interruption.
No problem at all. Thank you. This one again is from the United Way's 21-day challenge on implicit bias.
Implicit bias?
Implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias?
So this is kind of my intention was not racism.
Thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racism.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there's an over-representation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted,
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race, and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's a scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
So, to me, you know, thinking about implicit bias, it's really important because if I'm going to be able to identify my biases and overcome them, I have to look in the mirror, I have to think about them, I have to investigate ways, maybe I have to ask Gail to point out when she sees me using those biases, or a friend or whatever, but again, if we just say, we don't need to talk about race, we don't need to talk about racism, if we don't talk about it, it'll go away. This kind of thing doesn't go away. I attended when I was going back to school to get my teaching degree, I attended a leadership conference that was kind of put on by both Mount Mercy and Coe, and it was at Coe. And we had an awesome black, I believe he was a professor at Cornell, or he was in charge of diversity, a diversity director, I can't remember for sure, because it's been a while, but he they talked about the fog in here. He talked about, as we go through our lives, picture that you have this windshield in front of you, and all these different bugs of media, things you witness, things you experience, are all hitting that windshield, and pretty soon, you know what happens in your car when you have all that stuff on your windshield, your view becomes impaired. So I think we have to think about those things that have affected how we view other people, and start cleaning that windshield, so that we can have a clear look. Yes?
I just have to, you're saying that, I want to close with one comment, is that John's ability to listen helps all of us see clearer. You know, so that if we listen, you know, that goes back to, you know, Black Voices Matter, we're listening, our vision becomes clear. You know, I just think that's kind of a paradox.
Yeah, thank
that
you.
he can see clearer in some ways by listening.
Thank you. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I guess this is sort of related to like one of the videos you posted. Like, I recognize that person. I watched your videos. Like, I guess like the decoded video, Francesca Ramsey. I guess like she kind of popped out to me because, well, one, I'd seen her videos before. They were my age group, but then like I'm also familiar with like that there are several people in turn around my age group who like make very like long response videos try and be like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. So
It dies hard.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.